Hello everyone! Welcome to Now You See or Now You Don't, the vanishing and reappearance of women in the history of Western magic. It's really a great honor and a pleasure to be participating in this year's Multivirtual Con. I was fortunate enough to attend last year's con and I really had a blast. If you attended last year, I hope that this year's online events are enough to tide you over until the next time we can gather in person. And if you didn't attend last year, I hope that these events give you enough of a taste to make you want to join us the next time we can meet in person. But I digress. Welcome to my talk. It's about women and their role in the history of Western magic. I'm going to start out by asking you an important question. Should you trust a magician? It's a dicey proposition, to be sure. But you're at home. We aren't even in the same room, and I don't even know who you are. So I'm going to go out on a limb and ask you to go out on a limb and trust me. So take a moment to relax. Get really comfortable and let the tension drain out of your muscles. Stretch if that helps. Lean back in your seat and let yourself unwind. Next, take some nice, deep breaths. Exhale any tension. Inhale crisp, cleansing air. Focus on your breathing, its rhythm and flow. If you're magically minded, feel free to take a moment to ground and center yourself. Finally, when you feel ready, let your eyes gently close and experience the darkness that lives behind your eyelids. We're going to use that darkness like a movie screen and project some images there. While breathing and remaining relaxed, just chilling out, I want you to picture some things. Picture an alchemist, surrounded by strangely shaped glass vials and strange, gently bubbling chemicals. A wisp of smoke trails through the gloom as the alchemist holds a strange crystal over a glowing blue flame. Picture a ceremonial magician on a windswept hill, making a sweeping gesture with a sword to describe a ritual circle. Picture a learned Kabbalist, deep in thought in a library, surrounded by books and reference materials, manuscripts, and scribbled calculations. Picture an occultist wielding their knowledge and power to create a complex, esoteric tool that will be appreciated and used for generations to come. Picture a magical torchbearer that ensures the continuation of secret magical organizations. Okay, once you have those images firmly in your mind, open your eyes. And you can see the secret message I had for those of us who like to peek during eyes closed time. Now is the time when I ask you, who did you picture? Since I can assume we're all practicing magicians or lovers of occult history, let us start with fictional characters. I am, however, assuming that we are a particularly enlightened bunch because I have faith in you all. So I don't really expect you to have only pictured men. But play along with me while I present some of the fictional characters people usually name during this point in my talk. We can start out with two crowd favorites, Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape. Two amazing magicians, wizards in fact, amazing skill, brilliant thinkers, and the source of much fan fiction, so you gotta love them for that. Some folks may have thought of Gandalf the Grey, or White, the mysterious traveler, meddler, and orchestrator of both Bilbo's journey there and back again and Frodo's grueling adventure later on. Or this gentleman, Saruman, who teamed up with the orcs and angered all those imps and convinced the imps that they needed to go to war. Or hey, does anyone remember the Sage of Shadowdale? This is Elminster, who was one of my heroes growing up. The goddess Mystra turned him into a woman at one point so that he could find out what it was like, and so that he could bond himself more closely to magic. You possibly thought of Jonathan Strange, or Mr. Norrell, and their revivification of English magic, or John Constantine in one of his many forms, comic book character, animated character, or the live-action movie or TV show. Let's not debate about the live-action movie. We have to admit it happened. Or, if you're from my generation, maybe you're reminded of Jonathan Barnevelt, whose house had a clock in its walls. He teaches his nephew magic, and he lives next door to a witch who has 2 degrees in the occult sciences. That is a possible run-through of the fictional world. I could have used many other examples, and I apologize if I somehow left out one of your favorites. But I am here to talk about the real-world history of Western magic, so let us take a look at who you might have pictured in the world of nonfiction. I put these people in chronological order. So we'll start with Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical figure who was a combination of Hermes, the Greek god of communication, and Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and writing. Trismegistus means thrice great. Hermeticism is one of 3 major foundations of Western magic. Gnosticism and Platonism are the other 2. Many Hermetic writings were attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, including the Emerald Tablet, which was a foundational document in a lot of alchemical thought. John Dee and his partner, Edward Kelly, alchemists and ceremonial magicians who talked to angels and documented an entire angelic language while doing so. Also, Kelly liked to go around telling people he could make the Philosopher's Stone, and John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's astrologer and spy. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian theologian, philosopher, and mystic that was the source of the New Church movement. What, this guy didn't immediately spring to mind? MacGregor Mathers, who, with his wife Moina, created an early version of the tarot deck. He also interpreted and fleshed out the documents that helped to create the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the 19th century's largest and most famous magical organization. Arthur Edward Waite, member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, creator of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, author of countless mystifying books on the occult, which were unfortunately mystifying because his command of the English language left something to be desired. The next person in line mocked him mercilessly for his writing style. And that person would be wicked old Uncle Al. Yes, Aleister Crowley, who joined the Golden Dawn, sided with MacGregor Mathers when there was a dispute in the group, ended up publishing a lot of secret Golden Dawn materials, joined Theodore Royce's Ordo Templi Orientis, eventually taking it over as his own, and also was the author of books on many occult and esoteric topics. Gerald Gardner, father of Wicca, which was a religion he claimed predated Christianity. He was initiated into this ancient line of witchcraft by a woman named Dorothy, and eventually broke the laws of secrecy to share information about Wicca with the world. If you've heard of Gardnerian Wicca, you've likely heard of him. Or Alex Sanders, another Wiccan who split off from Gerald Gardner to create his own coven and his own lineage, and it eventually became a separate branch of Wicca called Alexandrian Wicca. It always impresses me how he managed to get both his first and his last name involved in the naming of his branch of Wicca. And finally, Raymond Buckland, responsible for carrying a lot of Wiccan concepts over from the UK to the United States, author of many books about Wicca and witchcraft, and a proponent of solitary or non-initiatory Wicca. So I'm not by any means trying to say that every single person listening to me today, or listening to me in the future, would only picture men in these roles. But I am saying that people are more likely to picture men in these roles. What was that? I'm hearing you say, surely not. At least not magicians, because they're thoughtful and diverse people who don't fall into the trap of erasing the contributions of women. I could have sworn I heard that. Sadly, as someone who swims in the waters of esoterica and who interacts with other people who do the same, I can assure you that women and their contributions to Western magic often get ignored or glossed over. This ignorance of what women have done, are doing, and can do leads to unfortunate situations like the one I once experienced with some members of a semi-secret organization that I belong to. I was standing in a group with my fellow society members, listening to a conversation about how we needed to really step up and start focusing on some of our ceremonial skills. It was suggested that perhaps we should start holding meetings to practice rituals and ritual skills. And this pleased me greatly because first I felt like a lot of our members didn't have the experience they needed to do what we were asking of them. And second, I really like ritual magic. The leader of the group, a man, turned to me and the two other women that were there and said, "And meanwhile, while we're having these meetings, you girls can do an arts and crafts night." I don't know if there are any children listening today, so I won't repeat my response. But that experience is just one of many that I have had over the years. The history of magic in the Western world has been viewed through a male lens, resulting in the erasure of contributions of women. And though it is true that parts of today's magical and esoteric world are busy attempting to rewrite history, slanting the male-centric behavior and attitudes of the past in an attempt to make them seem more inclusive in hindsight and in the present, the fact remains that women were often silent contributors even when providing significant input at key points throughout the history of magic. This is particularly ironic. Why is this particularly ironic? One of the key points in a lot of magical and mystical work is the union of opposites. Balance the masculine and the feminine so that they can harmonize and therefore become a joined generative power. This can take place within one individual person, between two people, or amongst a group of people. The joined generative power can make all kinds of things. It can make babies, it can make magic happen, it can make worlds. It's pretty versatile. The union is often represented visually as the combination of the sun and the moon, or the marriage of a king and a queen in alchemical texts. An imbalance in attention can create rifts that interfere with your magical abilities. And depending on your perspective, you can view almost everything as a magical ability. Continued inattention can lead to what we have today. A lot of magical environments, even the ones that promote themselves as being women-friendly, are simply not. I'm talking about all of this today for a few reasons. I like to talk about the history of magic and occultism, especially to people who don't usually think about it, because it has a direct influence on our culture and how our history unfolded. I also want to help continue to strengthen the recognition of the rightful, balanced place of women in occult and esoteric discourse, both academically and practically. I also like to hopefully provide a resource and, dare I say it, inspiration for writers and other creative folks by providing them with stories that they may not have heard before, because stories feed stories. And I'm also doing this as a magical act in order to contribute to the restoration of balance in today's magical scene. Didn't think you were going to participate in a magical act today, did you? Kind of cool, right? Please save your screams of horror for the end. So let's get started. But how do we start? With a brief history of Western magic. Don't worry, it will only be a very high-level view, because the history of magic is big. Western magical history starts with the dawn of time and runs all the way up to the current day. Needless to say, a lot has happened, but a view that is that high level doesn't really help us out much. So let's take a slightly lower level look. We'll break it up into big chunks because who attends a con for a detailed history lesson? I'm starting to feel a little bit like Hannah Gadsby up here. We'll start with late antiquity. So eventually, sometime after the dawn of time, late antiquity happened. The people living back then didn't call it late antiquity. They called it like Thursday or today. But anyway, during this time period, the 200s to the 500s in the Common Era, Hermeticism was the big thing, along with Gnosticism and Platonism. These terms may sound familiar to you because I mentioned them earlier as 3 of the pillars of Western magic. Hermetic texts were being written, alchemy was just starting to happen. Next came the Middle Ages, from about 1100 to around 1453. This is when alchemy really got into swing. Also, a lot of scribes in a lot of monasteries were copying out a lot of manuscripts. Despite monasteries being Catholic, somehow some of those manuscripts were grimoires or magical books. This is also the time period in which we see the first records of the Jewish Kabbalah, which becomes a key component in Western magic. So think alchemy labs, cool mysterious manuscripts, scrutinization of sacred texts. Good times were had by all. After that, the Renaissance happened, around 1300 through the 1600s. And thank goodness for that, or else we wouldn't have all those fantastic Renaissance fairs. During the Renaissance, Christians started to notice the Jewish Kabbalah and started to use it for their own ends. Near the end of this period, 3 documents that set Europe's interest in secret societies ablaze were published, and they were the Fama Fraternitatis Rosicrucis in 1615, the Confessio Fraternitatis in 1615, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz in 1616. This is the period when the Freemasons became more than a builders' guild and began to develop into a secret fraternal organization. The Enlightenment, which took place in the 1700s, happened after the Renaissance. This is a time period in which people were working hard to reconcile new thoughts about science and the diminishing power of the Catholic Church with esoteric and mystical practices. Western magic took a scientific cast. The New Church movement and mesmerism couched mystical concepts in pseudoscientific terms. The Freemasons and several other semi-secret organizations continued to grow throughout the 19th century. New initiatory groups cropped up everywhere. People joined multiple organizations at one time. Organizations grew and split and joined and broke up. Post-World War I, entire nations were mourning due to the staggering loss of life resulting from the war. This led to an international obsession with spiritualism and speaking with the dead. New Thought attempted to synthesize nearly every magical and mystical methodology and teach it to the average reader. That brings us to the 20th century. That time period saw a surge of correspondence courses in the early part of the century, as well as the birth of Wicca. By the 1960s and 1970s, eclectic and solitary witchcraft was growing. Then the 1980s and 1990s hit, and along with those decades came a moral satanic panic. But despite the panic, interest in magic and witchcraft grew and continued to grow right into the 21st century. The gentlemen we looked at earlier fit into the timeline like this, and they have contributed greatly to the history of Western magic. However, no matter how big of a mark these brethren made, we're missing their sisters. And those gaps, those missing spaces, exist throughout the entire timeline. Each gap represents a phenomenal story, and we're going to look at 6 of those stories today. By necessity, the stories will be short, and I will focus on the major contributions of these women to the magical world. Before we get started, though, it's confession time. There are so many stories out there, so many women I could have chosen so that I could share their stories with you, and I was completely biased in my choice. I simply picked women who have inspired me during my esoteric journey. As you can see by my timeline, I didn't even make sure I chose one woman for every time period. So, my magical act, my choices. So, we'll start with Mary the prophetess. Out of the 1 comes the 2. Out of the 2 comes the 3. And from the 3rd comes the 1 as the 4th. Mary the prophetess, explaining a key concept of alchemy. It is believed that Mary lived somewhere around the 1st through the 3rd century Common Era. She was also known as Mary the Jewess. Zosimos of Panopolis, a Gnostic and mystic writing around the end of the 3rd century, called her the Mother of Alchemy. She is also called the first true alchemist of the Western world. In the Islamic world, she was called one of the sages. And in general, she was considered to be one of 4 women who could create the Philosopher's Stone. And isn't that interesting, that 4 women alchemists were considered capable of doing the most important act in alchemy? She's also credited with the creation of several alchemical tools, including the double boiler, which is still occasionally called the bain-marie, particularly in the culinary world and in chemistry. It just means Marie's bath. The most well-known text that mentions her is the dialogue of Mary and Argo on the Magistry of Hermes. The next stop on our journey through the history of Western magic is Anna Marie Sieglerin. By the time she was 25 years old, she was working as an alchemist in the court of Julius of Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel. She had her own laboratory, and she even had an assistant. What she didn't have was an official title. She didn't have any formal training in alchemy. She couldn't point to a university or to a degree for legitimacy. What she did have was the conviction that she had been born especially pure and therefore suitable for alchemy, which many thought depended on the purity of the operator as much as it depended on the purity of the materials that were being used. She also had the idea of making up a lover who was the illegitimate son of Paracelsus, a famous alchemist. She claimed that this lover taught her the alchemical arts in order to get legitimacy and for market leverage to set herself apart from other alchemists. She wrote concerning the noble and precious art of alchemia. However, all did not end well for the alchemists in Julius's court. Anna Marie found herself in the center of a criminal case, accused of murdering a courier, making an attempt on the Duchess's life, and attempting to copy the keys to the Duke's chambers in order to steal some documents. Duke Julius also accused her and her fellow alchemists, one of which was her husband, of failing to deliver on their promises to deliver the Philosopher's Stone. While the men she worked with were executed for treason, she was strapped to an iron stool and burned as a witch. Next, we skip to the 19th century, where we will discuss 2 women who have had an immeasurable impact on the modern occult world. The first is Pamela Colman Smith. Pam, or Pixie to her friends, was an artist, a writer, and an occultist. She joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in 1901. And while she had an art career outside of the occult world as a graphic designer and illustrator, her biggest claim to fame is her collaboration on the creation of what's been called the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. Arthur Edward Waite, pictured earlier in this presentation, hired her in 1909 to draw the deck that he designed. He considered her a good candidate for the task because they were both members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Also because she was known for going into trance states and channeling drawings, similar to a method the Surrealists would use years later. In order to complete the deck, she did research in the British Museum, basing some of her images off an old Italian deck. She also made a choice to fully illustrate every card in the deck based upon key words that Waite gave her. This resulted in the first fully illustrated tarot deck. Despite her huge contributions to what makes this deck unique, her name never appeared on it. It was named after the publisher, writer, and Arthur Edward Waite. In recent years, the tarot and cartomancy community have been trying to change this by calling the deck the Rider-Waite-Smith deck or just the Waite-Smith deck. Here is a comparison of a pre-Waite-Smith deck Minor Arcana card and a similar card design that Pam came up with. You can see how this full illustration would make it much easier to call to mind the meaning of the card. It was truly innovative for the time. Our next influential woman in the esoteric world was also an artist and was also co-creator of the famous tarot deck, Lady Frieda Harris. I do wish I had fire and air and water and earth to draw with. Lady Frieda Harris in a letter to Aleister Crowley. Lady Harris was an artist and a student of projective synthetic geometry, which heavily influenced both her art and her esoteric work. She joined the OTO, and when she did, she was able to enter it at the 4th degree, thanks to previous degrees she had earned in co-masonry. When she was 60 years old, she met Aleister Crowley, and they were eventually to embark upon a magical project that would span the years from 1938 to 1942. The project was the creation of the Thoth Tarot deck. They originally estimated it would take around 6 months to complete. Instead, it took them 4 years. And if the years 1938 to 1942 sound significant to you, it might be because that's right around the time World War II was starting. Crowley and Harris, both in their 60s and living in the UK, created this deck via mail correspondence while coping with gas and food rationing, blackout requirements, and bombings of their home country. Throughout the process, Lady Harris paid Crowley a stipend for his magical tutelage, which helped to keep him afloat financially. She also helped bail him out of several financial crises. Here you can see a side-by-side comparison of Pamela Coleman Smith's star card on the left and Lady Frieda Harris's star card on the right. The flowing yet geometrical shapes pictured in Lady Harris's art are a direct result of her study of projective synthetic geometry. Moving closer to the modern day, our next woman of the occult world is Phyllis Seckler. She attained the 9th degree in the Ordo Templi Orientis, and she was what is called a lineage holder in the AA, a magical initiatory organization created by Aleister Crowley. Her lineage came through Jane Wolfe, who was a direct student of Crowley's. Upon Jane Wolfe's death, Phyllis inherited all of her papers and was able to carry on that branch of the AA. Also, after Crowley's death, she was a key player in typing, reviewing, and organizing Crowley's manuscripts. She was uniquely suited for this role because of the depth and breadth of her esoteric knowledge. Without her direct action, many of his writings would have been lost. She also played a key role in reviving the Ordo Templi Orientis. After the death of Karl Germer, the organization nearly died out. But with her knowledge and the assistance of Grady McMurtry, the order was reestablished in 1969. She founded 2 Thelemic organizations, the College of Thelema and the Temple of Thelema. She was also an outspoken feminist who worked for women's rights, both within the OTO and outside of the organization. She made it a special point to work with the disadvantaged because she felt everyone should have access to Thelemic thought and organizations, which definitely wasn't the prevailing way of thinking in the organization at that time. At the bottom of this screen, you can see the logos of some of the organizations she helped continue or found. Our final woman of the magical world is Dorine Valiente. Please forgive me, but I'm going to start this section with a recitation. This is from Dorine's poem, The Charge of the Goddess. It is one of the most beautiful and evocative pieces of Wiccan liturgical text. Listen to the words of the Great Mother, who was of old called Artemis, Astarte, Diana, Melusine, Aphrodite, Caradwin, Dana, Ariane Rod, Isis, Breed, and many other names. Whenever ye have need of anything, once in a month, and better it be when the moon be full, then ye shall assemble in some secret place, and adore the spirit of me, who am queen of all witcheries. There ye shall assemble, ye who are fain to learn all sorcery, yet have not won its deepest secrets. To these I will teach things that are yet unknown. If you've ever attended any Wiccan, neo-pagan, eclectic, or other nature-based magical workings, it is likely that you have heard a version of this poem. Dorine Valiente is called the mother of modern witchcraft with good reason. In addition to the Charge of the Goddess, she played a major role in writing, adapting, and editing the foundational text of Wicca. She was the high priestess in Gerald Gardner's coven, until he manufactured the Wiccan laws in order to limit the power a high priestess could wield. It came about that they were in the middle of a disagreement about Gardner's publicity seeking, and when she and another coven member penned some guidelines to help govern the behavior of coven members, he coincidentally discovered an old Wiccan set of laws that happened to be stomach-churningly misogynistic. So she left. But she did publish one of the first 3 books on Wicca, and her writings became what effectively democratized Wicca. Prior to the release of information, one had to be initiated into an active coven to practice the religion. She released enough information for people to practice on their own. Another key role she played was in the support of accepting and welcoming gay and lesbian witches into Wicca. Believe it or not, this was still a topic of debate well into the 1990s. Dorine is the last of my examples, but there are so many more. It was difficult to pick out only a few of these amazing women. There are more out there waiting for you to discover them, learn from them, and be inspired by them. My friends, it is my sincere hope that now you see her. And I hope just a little bit this talk will help to shift focus, not only to real-world women of magic, and not only to women. A true magician seeks balance. To sign off, I'd like to pay tribute to some of the fictional magicians that have inspired me to write, to dream, and yes, to perform magic. The 3 witches of Discworld, Nanny Ogg, Granny Weatherwax, and Magret Garlic. Minerva McGonagall, she came along late in my life, but she was an inspiration. Zantana, for being both a stage magician and a real magician, and kicking ass. And finally, and most important, Mrs. Zimmerman, from The House with a Clock in Its Walls. I would not be the witch I am today without her. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of Multiverse. The next slide is going to provide a list of some of the sources that I used to create this talk.